Thank you very much, Phil.
You're
Good to
welcome.
see you again, Phil.
Good to see you all as well. Thank you.
Okay, it's ready. You kick it off.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our full team meeting today. I want to start out by acknowledging the core team for the great work that they've already done, and you're going to get a chance to see more of that today. We are at a milestone that requires some input from you as the team. So we've got 2 agenda items designed to accomplish getting your input. The first part of our meeting will be Cello demonstrating and explaining the assessment and survey for the Tier 1 questions. And they'll also be sharing the reporting tools that have been developed. And then we want to next have a dialogue and discussion about next steps and possibly Tier 2 questions. So those are our 2 items. First, Scott's going to set the stage for those items so that we can kind of warm up, because it's been a while since the whole team's been together, and we need to kind of catch up with what the core team's been working on. So we're ready to engage in a really rich dialogue about next steps. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, this will be a very quick refresher to just get us back up to speed in terms of where we're at. The core team has done a lot of work. And you'll recall this continual improvement process where as part of the scope, we have focused on the assessing the system maturity and the analytics associated with it so that it can be applied to individual work processes. We have a work plan for the year. And we'll be discussing that first box here more fully. Cello's going to be kind of going through what the core team has done. And we're going to be moving in later to testing and pilot implementation, revising and finalizing the assessment tool based on some pilots that are going to be conducted. And then we're going to be preparing case studies that summarize what those individual pilot utilities have accomplished. Next slide.
Okay, just a second. Give me just a second, Scott. I have
Okay, that's okay. I'll just keep going. The next slide that we'll get to here reminds us that we went through a narrowing process, taking 400 different practices and characteristics of high-performing workforce and organizational culture. We narrowed it into 7 different categories that you'll see the slide for in a bit. There we go on the left side, and there are individual questions associated with that are part of a survey, and then today we'll be going through what the work of the core team, what it currently looks like, including the analysis that and reporting that goes along with that, and then finally, if you look at the next slide, we'll be as we move ahead, we'll be finalizing that analysis and reporting, and we're looking to get some feedback today on the work that's been done so far and the steps ahead that Cello's going to go through. So with that, why don't we just dive right into some more detail. Welcome everybody. See a few people are continuing to join, and Cello can take it from here.
Thank you, Scott. So I wanted to go quickly through those first steps, that the collect responses and then analysis and presentation of results, and show how this developed. I'm sorry about that. I have a lot of windows up. Give me just a second. So we had a number of questions, if you remember, that had to do with different areas, and we had tier 2 questions and so forth. So the data that you are seeing is based on a on the work that the core team has been doing to define the question. And these are the 7 categories. This is what the result looks like for a simulated response to the survey. So this is the sort of overall dashboard that shows sort of the status of each of the 7 categories. We can look here at pay or work worksheet for organizational strategy and performance and how the results matched up. You can see the legend hopefully here. Strongly disagree to strongly agree, and these things change color. You can say, well, what were the responses from engineering, and or what were they from administration, or what was the management thinking, or what was the staff in the field thinking. So you can really slice through these through the analysis of the responses. So this is in the category of organization strategy and performance. This is for organizational values. This is overall results. Here again, you can slice and say, okay, how does executive management feel about the organizational values, and how does staff in the field think about organizational values? And I did not I only highlighted difference, not because I wanted to show a really bad example, but just to kind of show how the overall result can be analyzed in more detail. And this is the same for the category responsibility. The questions are shown here, and then these are the responses. I simulated generated responses to reflect what the results of a survey look like. So this is for responsibility and accountability, reward and recognition, communication, employee engagement. And again, each one of these can be sliced. How does executive management think about engagement? Or how does staff in the field think about engagement? Or how does management think about engagement? Just kind of, or whether you're talking about IT or you're talking about engineering and so forth. So it gives a possibility to look at different, and then teamwork and collaboration. So this is sort of what that dashboard, the analytical tool, looks like today. So I'm going to stop right now and see if there are any questions or thoughts on this. And I have to acknowledge that Parijat from Kansas City was very helpful with her comments and with her ideas. So this is the dashboard. I'm going to show the survey next, what the survey, actually the format of the survey looked like. Any questions, Todd?
So Cello, just on where it has role in the business unit and so forth, that's an opportunity to break it down by, who's the type of person that's responding to the survey. And of course, it assumes that there's a larger, mix of people, large enough mix of people. So if you put down a response, if there's only one executive management person taking the survey, then that would show that person's answers. And confidentiality is an issue. So it would kind of depend on the sample size of the participants, correct?
That is correct. And this is something that Parijat has mentioned earlier about the fact that they, in her organization, they are going from anonymous to confidential. So maybe Parijat, you can kind of expand on that idea.
Yes. So these were just to, show that we can do if required, and we can choose to hide based on how many have responded. So there is a possibility of just in this that we can hide if the sample size is less than 5, as we were discussing, Scott, earlier, and we can hide them altogether from this.
No, and Cello, this is maybe obvious to everybody else, but it takes a while sometimes when you're looking at this reporting. But it looks, so you have an overall category score, and there were 7 categories, and then you break it down to each individual question, and what the distribution is for that, which allows you to decide what it is that you want to focus on.
That is correct, because this dashboard up here gives the overall view if you have all the answers and on all the, on the whole survey. And it can show here whether, by the color, whether something is not so mature or, very mature, and then you can dig into it. So this shows that this organizational strategy and performance was a result of consolidating the answers to question 1, 2, and 3. And these are the sort of answers that came out. You see that third question was 3.38. And the number of questions we have seen in that spreadsheet. So you can then go into the individual, for example, communication is here. You can have these questions. You can click on that tab and see how overall the questions were asked. Now, there's a if it's completely anonymous, so we don't have, because D1 and D2 filters or slicers, as they call them, are really the results of answers to questions D1 and D2 that are a sort of demographic question. So these questions can be modified, but without having an understanding of what the difference is between executive management and staff in the field, it's kind of not as easy to sort things out,
Yeah, and Cello, your examples here, and if you go back to the category graphic, they are all relatively, they're in the 2 range, and this is just a simulation. But let's say that there were some 4s and there were some 2s. Then what that allows you to do is to say, well, the ones where we have low scores may be the ones that we want to focus on, as opposed to the high scores. And likewise for within the categories, that could be the case too. So it's a lot of good reporting that allows you to decide what you want to focus on.
That's correct. And what should be pointed out is that these are answers to level 1 questions. And I have maybe too many windows here. I'm not sure where my Excel went, but there are differences in not only overall, but also, if you look at, executive management, scores, or, first line supervisor scores, or, manager scores, you can see that there are different, the way they came out. And this was just a hypothetical example that I created. So there is information in the overall graph, but there's also information on the how is it perceived, and also there you can slice it by department and see if engineering, versus finance. Versus finance. So there is a lot of possibility to say, or how does maintenance feel about it, or how does engineering feel about it? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There are different ways to slice it, and obviously, if you go use both engineering and executive management, you're going to know the person, right? But the point that Barja was making is that this knowledge is useful, but people may not be comfortable if it's shared broadly. So I think, Parijat, that's why you guys went to from anonymous to confidential. Could you maybe expand on that just a little bit?
Sure, yes. So right now, how we do our survey, it is anonymous. We do not get any feedback on, who you are. And we get some demographic, but I am more interested in getting more details on who you are, where you work, and things like that, because then we could do more detailed people analytics. We are still discussing if that is a possibility. We are thinking of doing our next employee survey in first quarter of 2022. So that's in discussion with our leadership if that is something that we want to do. At this point, we are thinking of keeping it optional if employees are open to share more details, and they can share. If not, we'll see how that goes. And then in the next cycle, we can decide if we want to go confidential altogether.
So there are a couple people, that are on the call who've participated in a core team meeting or two, or does or this group, does anybody else have any reactions to it? Lisa, you could respond, and others can chime in as well. And don't talk over each other here, just maybe one at a time.
I'll start, but briefly, I just think that the way we have to look at all these tools is it's going to have to be iterative. And so while we can compare with each other, we also need to compare with our own. So I see some of the value of this is, and an important aspect of the value is repeating this at a later stage and seeing how those scores either improve or don't improve. Because the heart of the difficulty of changing culture in an organization is the fact that everybody is used to the old. And that's in a large part been how they've been successful. And so it's really hard to see what needs to be shed so that we can really be the kind of organization that's needed to meet the challenges that we're facing in the world and in our organizations today. So I feel like we're at a really good place, and that this will continue to evolve, but getting the kinds of indicators that things are not as good as you thought they were, because that's usually a surprise. I think when you do cultural measurements, oftentimes we think as leaders it's much better than it actually is. And so, that first step of change is to assess, well, have the aspiration, but then assess where you're at and how ready are you to move to the next stage. So the relativeness of the scores, I think, is really good from my perspective. Thanks.
And Lisa, just to illustrate your point, in the simulation that Cello did, when he broke it down to what do executive leaders and managers think, they were high scores. But the employees, it was lower scores. And so that is an indication of some things that need to be worked on.
Absolutely. Right.
Jessica?
I'll just chime in and basically agreeing with Lisa here. I think there is tremendous value in being able to break down these results by role, because the results are often vastly different perspectives depending on, where you are in the organization. So, while I think that the challenge lies when people feel like you're breaking it down, maybe it's harder to be honest. So you may find, I guess, that you don't get the negative responses as freely if people feel like they might be singled out based on how you're breaking down what the results look like. But I think when you look at it as a big lump sum, it's too hard to target where you need to make improvements. So just kind of working on that communication strategy, I guess, would be really important up front for how we're going to use this information, and how to remain confidential. I don't know how you go about that yet, but I think it could be a bit of an issue, but I think it's important to be able to break it down like this.
Yeah. Rebecca, did you have any comments? I know you've been following all of this.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Not beyond what Lisa and Jessica have already shared, I really appreciate Power BI to be able to break down the data and see it in this manner. So yeah, really nothing more to add. I think what's been said is pretty much my observations as well. Thank you.
Oh, great.
So I think let me just show this was one topic that we wanted to discuss, is to really look at how to collect the responses, and then how to analyze them and how to present them. So that's one thing. But this all so far has been for tier 1. If we move to tier 2, we had designed originally that each one of the tier 1 questions had make it a little bit bigger, had these. This was like the example for the organization's goals, and and then these were, if they were not agreeing or strongly agreeing, then they would get these questions. But that really makes the survey huge, because there's 18 questions in tier 1, and there's, combined with tier 2, it becomes not so easy to navigate. So the way it is proposed now is that we would really break this down so that these questions on the bottom, the tier 2, would be the second tier would be in this kind of format. I'm sorry, I thought that was in a where I just made an example for instead of saying, okay, these are all the things that are wrong, that we to diagnose the problem, to ask questions very much the same, but to change them into a positive statement, like how could we improve, or so for example, how would you rate the quality of usefulness of your organization, and they say, or organizations should involve employees, because right here does not involve employees, but we would change it to organizations should involve employees, and then say, how much do you think this would add to improvement? I need to change not an improvement, just to improvement. So this is the second topic we wanted to put on the table today. Would it be better to have questions on the level 2 in a positive sense. And that way, when you have these results and you see where your areas or weakness are, then you would send the second survey only to those areas that are pink or red or yellow or whatever. Does that make sense?
So Cello, for those that had been involved in the tier 2 before, the idea was to take the answers from the tier 1 questions and say, if you were weak in those areas, why were you weak? But what you're suggesting here is, rather than just focus on what's wrong and the whys, to turn it into positive statements about what would we do about that particular weakness that was identified, which might garner more participation and involvement and engagement from those during the survey, and what would they like to see improved and what would they do about it. So kind of gets into the future state of what we're trying to get at, in terms of organizational culture and workforce.
Yeah, that's precisely it, and thank you for saying it that way, because I think it would also be more inclusive, because we would ask with people, okay, so what do you think would help, instead of just tell us what's wrong and then we're going to think about it and then we're going to come back with an answer, and with the hope or an expectation that this way they would own a part of the solution as well and feel maybe more involved. And maybe, Lisa, do you have any thoughts on this? Does this make any sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's helpful would be the word I think I would use. It's multiple ways of being able to drill down is always valuable. So being able to have the tool, have that flexibility is one of the things that appeals to me.
Yeah. So, well, thank you. Roxy, I accidentally muted you. Can you unmute yourself, please? Because I feel really guilty about it. And I want to see if you're,
Do you have any comments, Roxy?
I do not have any comments at this time, so I'm just glad to be able to have information available, but no comments right now.
okay. Yeah, and apologies again. It was not intentional. I didn't mute you intentionally.
No problem.
Anybody else? Phil, do you have any thoughts? Any thoughts?
No, I don't have any thoughts, but I'm enjoying the slides that you're sharing with us and the information that you all are sharing as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I have to remember what the last slide was. Give me just a second. So for those who are interested in the gory detail, the survey was created in Microsoft Forms. They get saved to SharePoint. We then can send the survey, collect them. It automatically will be saved in SharePoint again in Excel format. That Excel data is going to be ingested by Power BI to create these reports on tier 1 results. Then you would look at and review them just like what we've done now, identify vulnerabilities. You would then be able to access from SharePoint, you would be able to access the Power BI report. Then you would configure the scope of the tier 2 survey and decide if you want to have follow-up questions and for what areas and stuff like that. Then you would send that survey form out, collect the responses. It would be again saved in Excel format. You would use Power BI similarly the way we've used it for tier 1 questions, you would use them for tier 2 results, and then review the tier 2 report, and it would be, if it's stated positively, those responses would be included as we develop plans for improvement. So I'm going to stop and see if there are comments or suggestions.
So Cello, stepping way back, what we were looking at all along was to assess where we're at for a particular process or function. This wasn't intended to be an organization-wide survey. It was on a particular process that would be identified, and that's what we were going to pilot different ones also for those that are going to be conducting pilots. But then you do the assessment, you get the results, and you have a level of granularity to analyze the efforts. But then you're producing, what are you going to do about it? And so the intent was in your tier 2, it looks like, is to identify the kinds of improvements that seem to be, that there seems to be a consensus around in terms of what ought to be addressed so that it can fit into the change process, going from where you're at to where you want to be, and integrating in with the change process that's also evolving through another team. But this data and information would be used in the changes that are identified in the utility to move forward with.
Yes, and we would. The plan is to have a similar type of assessment and analysis tools using the same. We intentionally stayed within the Microsoft realm, which is probably going to be a lot easier to get approval from your IT department and be blessed by them. So we would use the same type of process that you see here to look at the complexity of the process that you're looking at, and what is it really and then also have the same structure and same approach and same tools to look at technology applications. And therefore, one could, if, for example, you look at what we would propose is that you look at the business process first. And the business process is very simple, and it involves just one person calibrating a flow meter. You probably don't need to have a workforce survey like this. But if it's something like asset management, where you have every possible department involved in it, maybe it's not a bad idea, because of the complexity of the business process, to include something like this. So you could also tailor, you could adjust, following this method, one could adjust how to match the tool to the job. So I want to see if there are some thoughts or reactions to that. Okay.
It's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, I know.
It really is, but I think the intent was to say this is the work that's been going on, both on the tier 1 questions, the tier 2 questions, and here's how it fits into ultimately making the improvements and dealing with change and even associated technology and work process that would have similar assessment types of tools available as well.
So what we see on this slide is the immediate goals for us is to finalize the questions. We have gone through questions a few times, so we can at least nail down, have one more meeting or one more vote from the core team or everybody else who wants to put in a voice to see what is the content, what are the questions actually asked in that survey and stuff like that. So we can kind of put that to bed, at least for a while, and then finalize the analysis tool. I showed what it looks like now if these slicers and dashboards don't do a good enough job, we can change them, how the results are presented. So this would be our goal on the overall initiative, as we had defined that we would complete in this year. And I think we've made significant progress on tier 1, and then when we make a couple of decisions on tier 2, whether to move them from sort of negative to positive, if people agree with that. I don't think there's a problem to finish our scope in time. Any thoughts on this? I am sorry. These slides, I forgot to take the sound and the narration, so I'm hearing Alice. You guys maybe cannot hear it, but I'm hearing Alice talking, so it's really distracting. So, any thoughts on this? How do people feel that? How would this need to be changed, and how would this need to be changed to make it easier for you if you wanted to do an assessment or workforce and culture? If you have any ideas on that, does it look like it would be useful or not? And again, we didn't change the questions. The questions are exactly what we spent a year going from 400 to 18. So those are the questions. We didn't change the content.
Cello, could you rephrase your question? You're asking for feedback on. I think I lost as Scott said, it's a lot to take in. So I want to be responsive.
I'm thinking. We have spent, and I probably didn't say it very well. Usually I come in with all sorts of muffled statements, and then Scott steps in and explains what I just said. So our goal would be for this year to finalize the content, which means the questions for the survey, and the method for dealing with it. I think that this method that stays entirely within the Microsoft ecosystem is going to cause you the least trouble with your IT departments. And so the question is, do you think that an assessment like this and this type of analysis that I've shown would this be useful in your utility, in your agency?
Around a specific work process. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are we on the right track?
Yeah.
Seems like we're ready to do a pilot, right? Like, wouldn't it be if we had a few organizations that would say, let's give it a run?
Yeah.
And when I say a pilot, it's like, okay, you do the survey, tells you something, you architect a plan, and at some point you would revisit that. And that to me is putting it to the test. Are we ready to put it to the test?
That was my hope, expectation, and that is definitely the best thing to do next. So I think we're going to have a core team call a meeting next week, I believe. So what I would propose is that we work out with the core team, we work out all these kinks. And if there are things to be changed, we can definitely change. But I think that we now have, a lot of things in place. If we we've done all these things are in place, the ones that have green check marks. So if we're not far from being able to complete the tools. And the survey, the tier 2 survey, we already basically have a set of questions. we would need to put them into like, more positive statements, but we can use the same approach. So I think definitely by the end of this year, for those who want to do pilots, that would be fantastic if we could plan that for next year. That was our original, our original hope, if you recall, that we would then test pilot implementation for about 3 months, hopefully have some maybe preliminary results by the 2022 UMC, Utility Management Conference. After that, we would have a period to revise and finalize the assessment tool, the analysis method, the presentation, and then integrate with change management. And we would have then summer workshop, and then 3 more months to actually apply this version to prepare case studies and guidelines. So that was from the original work plan that we have defined for this first year.
So Lisa, I think along those lines, there's also draft guidelines for the assessment, so that we simplify this through the draft guidelines for how to use the tool, so that it gives some guidance. And we'd already had early on some utilities, like you were suggesting, had identified, well, what's a work process in my organization that where we might want to pilot this? And there were a few utilities that stepped forward and said, for procurement or for other contracting or some other process that they have, or a function in their organization, they're where they've just pulled together in a reorg or something, where the culture and workforce assessment would be very useful. So, that would be a step before too long to identify, who's interested in applying this. We just wanted to make sure that we're on the right track. We got any feedback, that we finalized the language of these and the tool. And so we're good to go for that. And this was just asking for are there any fatal flaws that you see that need to be addressed? Do we seem on track?
Okay, what I would very much welcome is at least one negative comment. I would very much like somebody to say, okay, I maybe like some things, but this really stinks and needs to be changed.
So I'll throw one at you since you want to be challenged today. There's a lot of talk about systems thinking.
Yes.
That organizations need systems thinking, and it's been talked about for a long time. It's one of I think our greatest challenges as leaders is how do we take our organization from the traditional organizing by functions and structures, silos. That's all we've never known. So if our role as leaders is to change the culture, that's at the heart of it, is how do we shift away from that structured approach to systems thinking approach? And is this going to help us see where we're at and where we need to focus our work to become more of a systems thinking organization?
Yes. Now, where that comes to play is when we integrate and combine these things. When we combine the analysis of the process of the workflows and the roles and responsibilities with this one, that, how do people feel about it, which is, a lot about this, the stuff that's really important is not how things are, but how people see them and how they feel about it. And then also to have a similar method to look at technology. I think having the ability to look at all 3 aspects will bring the aspect of system thinking fully to bear, because one will be able to say, this is what we're actually trying to accomplish. We have a map of our process. We can see who's involved. We can see what information is required. And that then feeds into what we need to do with technology. What do we have to do on the people side? So I think that these connections that exist, but are traditionally not examined because of the way organizations are structured, and because of the way our education is structured, and because of many other barriers, I think that this would then provide the ability to examine these interactions, which are at the heart of the systems thinking.
That's
So-
a great discussion. Jessica, you've been involved with several different teams. Is this making sense to you? Or what would help in making it more sensible for you?
I think this is all making sense. I'm kind of thinking through it and where would be a good first place to apply it in our organization. Is it, kind of a newer program or something that's been around for a bit? I'm just kind of thinking through it, but I think this is good and a pretty straightforward process.
Rebecca, likewise for you, you've been on several teams participating, listening in. Is this making sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the earlier question about whether this tool would be helpful, I think it would certainly, for me personally, depend on what's done with the results of the survey. I think for me, success of this tool would be engagement from participants, folks really. And so I was thinking about how this tool could be extended to those folks that might not always have access to being in front of their computer, and just making sure that it's accessible so that we have the engagement we need to get the data that's needed to then, move that culture forward. So, but yeah, generally speaking, I think the tool is very good. So no negative comments, Cello, sorry.
Okay.
Rebecca, one of the other words that you use a lot and you want to use prominently is the word trust. And it's not unlike what you were saying about engagement, but do you think that this would help build the trust that's necessary to basically move forward with improvement of organizational culture and workforce?
I think what builds trust is the people, not the tool. So I think the tool is solid, but I think what we as leaders do with the information, how we present it to our employees, how we follow up. For me personally, my experience has been that that's really what builds trust, at least in our organization. Our workforce looks at what we do with the feedback that they've provided, what we as leaders do with that feedback. Mm-hmm.
So it's not enough just to survey it. If you don't do anything about it, then the trust is going to fall apart if you ever had it, right? But the follow through is so important, like you say.
Okay, so once again, before I sign off, I would like to also be recorded. I want to thank Parijat for her ideas, and I am looking forward to work with her and the core team and everybody else on making this really useful. So I will, let me just end the recording. So, because I